everyone. In this video, we're going to describe the basic structure of the neuron. So a neuron is the principal cell of the nervous system that is responsible for communication. So we're going to see that it has kind of an unusual structure, but this structure is specialized so that it can communicate with cells, receive messages, and then pass them along. So first we'll just label the parts of the neuron. We see all these sort of like pointy things coming out of the cell, and so those are called dendrites. And then the big round part in the middle is called the cell body. And then we have usually one long axon that extends from the cell body. And at the end of it, we have what's called the synaptic terminal. It's also called the synaptic knob. It has a couple of other names, but that's how I'll refer to it. So we're going to be drawing sort of like the model neuron, similar to how we drew the model cell before. This will allow us to focus mostly on the communication function of the neuron. We won't consider any of the other structures of neurons, even though there are other types. We're only going to draw this one. So a neuron is a fully functional cell that has lots of organelles, and we can see in this picture that the cell has a nucleus and lots of rough endoplasmic reticulum, or RER. And of course that means that we also have a Golgi apparatus. And then we have these vesicles that contain neurotransmitters. So the neurotransmitters are, think of them as like ligands, specific chemicals that are needed for communication. So this is one of the things that's synthesized by the rough ER, and then the Golgi sort of packages it up so that the neurotransmitters are ready. Now along the axon, we notice that there are lots of microtubules. Not to say there aren't microtubules in the cell body as well, but I just want to draw some attention to the microtubules in the axon, because these vesicles that contain the neurotransmitters, once they're nicely packaged in these vesicles, they actually travel down the axon using specific transport proteins. So the proteins, they're actually they're kind of funny. They have almost like the vesicle is like sitting on top of these little feet, and the feet just sort of walk the vesicle all the way down to the synaptic terminal. And so the vesicles containing the neurotransmitters actually just sort of hang out in the synaptic terminal until there's an appropriate stimulus to cause exocytosis. We also have mitochondria, of course, because this cell looks like it's pretty busy, so it's going to need to have a vast supply of ATP. So let's just talk a little bit more about the components that we mentioned of the neuron. The dendrites receive information from other neurons, and I guess, to be fair, they can also be certain, that's where like the receptors are. So if we're talking about sensory neurons, they may be kind of, they may not be receiving information from a neuron. But first we're going to start by talking about neurons communicating with neurons. The axon is specifically for flow of information from the cell body to the synaptic terminal. So although, as I said, there are other types of axons, we're going to consider this axon to be unidirectional flow, meaning that the flow of information is from the cell body to the synaptic terminal and not the other way. We also notice that the point of connection between the cell body and the axon is an area called the axon hillock. So we just want to draw a little bit of attention to that now, because we're going to mention it when we talk about action potential, the primary function of neurons. So let's focus a little bit more on the synaptic terminal for a moment. So a synapse is a specialized site where a neuron will communicate with another cell. So that other cell could easily be another neuron, or it could be an effector. And when we say effector, we're talking about a muscle cell or a gland, and we sort of refer to that as the neuroeffector junction. So if it was a muscle cell that we were talking about, we would call it the neuromuscular junction. Or if it was a gland, we would call it the neuroglandular junction. So the effector, remembering our sort of scheme of homeostasis, we want to pay attention to the neurons delivering communication to peripheral effectors. And that could be other neurons, but it also could be other types of cells. There are two general types of synapses that we could find. They are chemical and electrical. So we're just going to draw them both and sort of take a look. So in the chemical synapse, we can see that we have what looks like two neurons that are communicating. So the first part is going to be the axon, and in the axon we have the presynaptic membrane, and then it's actually, if this is another neuron that it's communicating with, it's that second neuron, that's a dendrite. So the axon will communicate with the dendrite. So again, unidirectional flow in through the dendrite, out through the axon. So that membrane of the dendrite is the postsynaptic membrane. And in a chemical synapse, there's a gap in between, and that gap in between is called the synaptic cleft. And of course, we know that at the synaptic terminal, we have our vesicles with the neurotransmitters. So the neurotransmitter makes up the fourth part of the chemical synapse. So given the proper stimulus, exocytosis of those vesicles will occur, dumping those neurotransmitters into the chemical synapse. And then they're just going to function as basically like communication ligands. All right, and then the electrical synapse will reference gap junctions. So we actually drew the similar drawing in the cell junctions video, and here we see two neurons. Same thing, we have the presynaptic membrane. The same thing, the presynaptic neuron is an axon that is coming to that synaptic terminal, and then the post is the dendrite. And instead of there being a gap in between, we instead have gap junctions. So the membranes are very, very close to each other, and the gap junctions function as a tunnel, so that any electrical charge that may be at one coming from the axon and the presynaptic neuron will be able to just travel directly through those gap junctions into the postsynaptic neuron. So that pretty much covers the basic structure of the neuron. The next time we draw the neuron, we'll probably take a little bit of a closer look at the membrane, and we'll draw in many of the membrane transporters that exist in the different parts of the neuron. But for now, this is a pretty good overview of sort of what we have at baseline, just a happy resting neuron. So that's all for now. See you next time when we talk about neuroglia. Thanks for watching.